Okay, so what is nitric oxide and how can we harness it for stress, or is it helpful for stress? So, what I want to do is I want to talk to you about three things you must know to understand what you can get out of this video if you're dealing with stress, fatigue, crashing in the middle of the day, having anxiety, not having focus, not having concentration, not having the ability to fall asleep or stay asleep or wake up with a lot of energy for the next day, just not handling your stressors very well. And in today's day and age, there are so many stressors that we are bombarded with on a daily basis, from poor nutrition to eating on the go to job related stressors to physical, emotional stressors to viral infections to life. What happens is we ultimately get run down, and when we're run down, we hear we have a low immune system. When we have a low immune system, we can get more sick, and then we don't thrive. So what I'd like to do is talk to you about nitric oxide and how it relates to stress. My name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and today we're talking about nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is a pretty complicated compound in the body. It's actually a gas, and it evaporates very, very quickly, or gets used up very, very quickly. But there's a lot of information that we need to know so that we can harness that to get better health. And I had the great fortune of interviewing Dr. Nathan Bryan. He wrote this book called Functional Nitric Oxide Nutrition, which I would highly recommend because it's a great read. But I'm going to explain some takeaways for you, especially as it relates to stress. So, nitric oxide, like I was mentioning, is basically the combination of nitrogen and oxygen that come together, and they end up creating a coupled effect of electron doning, from the nitron to the nitrogen to the oxygen. Kind of complicated stuff, but at the end of the day, it's a great signaling molecule. It's a communicating molecule. And as David Sinclair talks about, aging is the lack of communication. So Dr. Nathan says that there's no human pathology that isn't impacted by nitric oxide. Pretty bold words, and it's true, because if you think about your vascular function, you think about your endothelial function. If there are harmful compounds in the blood, you need to be able to have a signaling molecule right in the streets, so to speak, of New York, going through all those thoroughfares. Having the same thing in your blood vessels is super important for vasodilation. We all know about nitric oxide, or we mostly know about nitric oxide in terms of being a very potent vasodilator. Can't speak. Giving you more blood flow to your areas, and in fact, Viagra is a nitric oxide pharmaceutical. But anyways, there's so much more that goes into nitric oxide. It's a communicating messenger, and we need communication in times of inflammation and stress, especially, again, as I mentioned, as it relates to a virus. So it doesn't just cause vasodilation, increases blood flow as a result of that vasodilation, and also is a signaler to downstream mechanics for our body to be able to deal with these stressors effectively. And so what does stress have to do with it? Obviously, stress is just not psychosocial stress, but stress is also inflammatory stress, free radical production. And what happens is, when we have free radical production, we have something called NADPH oxidase, which signals your hydrogen peroxide and your superoxide radicals to mobilize your immune system. And nitric oxide is a really important signaling molecule for that. But if nitric oxide becomes uncoupled, this is work that Nathan Paul is doing, Martin Paul, and he talks about nitric oxide and peroxynitrite. And what happens is, when nitric oxide is uncoupled, that peroxynitrite is very damaging. And then that NADPH oxidase ends up continuing to create free radicals because nitric oxide is uncoupled. So what we want to do is we want to couple that nitric oxide together so that that NADPH oxidase slows down, is not signaling all those free radical molecules, and is able to reduce inflammation. And then you're able to have better blood flow and immune strength, because now you have better signaling. Hopefully that made sense. Very complicated, but if we were to boil that down, when nitric oxide status is good, then your health is good. You're dealing with stress well. You're reducing the avalanche of inflammation that causes your signaling mechanisms and your immune system to be depleted and creates a host of all other types of health conditions like cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, type 2 diabetes, metabolic issues, adrenal issues, thyroid issues. There's no hand in any cookie jar that doesn't take place with nitric oxide. Some things that you can do is you can actually test your nitric oxide levels. So I'll put a link underneath this video on what you can do, because it's a saliva test and it works very well with measuring your nitric oxide levels. There's also a product that you can take made by the same company that I'll post in the link below. But what I want to do is I want to give you some clues on what you can do naturally, because there's a lot of things you can do naturally. Now, the nitric oxide pathway, there's two main pathways. There's the endogenous pathway, and that's the NOS that you've heard of, and maybe you've heard of arginine, whole other video. But when we asked Dr. Nathan Bryan, when there's nitric oxide deficiency from that inborn pathway, not the functional what you eat pathway, the endothelial pathway, why is that? And he said, you know what, there's never a reason why there's an arginine deficiency that would cause that nitric oxide to be low. And that's a really aha moment, because a lot of people take arginine for boosting their nitric oxide levels, but Dr. Nathan Bryan says there's never a problem with the arginine being deficient because we need so little of it. But anyways, what you can do though is functionally you can support your own endogenous production, meaning you're making it from the outside in. And that can be things like nitrates and nitrite foods. So leafy green vegetables again, beetroots, spinach. Now, some of you may be saying, well, that's not good for oxalates. It's true, but you may have more of a primary concern to boost your nitric oxide levels than you do with the concern of creating more oxalates. And that's a whole other, if you're even wondering about that, it's a whole other sophisticated question that I would say, think about boosting your nitric oxide levels first. The other thing I would want to tell you is that if you're using mouthwash will kill the natural bacteria in your mouth. And that natural bacteria is really helpful for not even helpful, it's required to reduce nitrates and nitrites into nitric oxide. So in English, you need that bacteria to convert nitrate into nitric oxide. So if you're using mouthwash, then you're having a major challenge with your ability to make nitric oxide. If you're not eating a lot of nitric oxide foods, leafy green vegetables, and beetroots and spinach and a lot of other foods that are very high in nitric oxides or nitrates, then you are going to have, and you have mouthwash issues or you're using it, you're not going to make a lot of nitric oxide. And there's studies that show that that nitric oxide production is low, blood pressure goes up when people use mouthwash. The other thing we see is proton pump inhibitors being a major problem, and we also see antibiotics too. So talk to your doctor about that and see if that's even on their radar. So that's how I wanted to explain it to you. Like, look, nitric oxide is an important compound in every part of your body for great health. And as we age, we go lower and lower and lower and lower. And as a result, we see these chronic metabolic issues and fatigue and burnout and high blood pressure and high blood sugar and pain and focus and brain fog, and not handling your stressors very well, being more likely to be impacted from say a viral infection. And you can do, what you can do about it is you can measure your blood nitric oxide levels, which is inferred from the nitrites. You can eat lots of nitrates and nitrite foods. You can reduce your use of mouthwash and proton pump inhibitors, and you can also take the nitric oxide boosting supplement. I'll post in the link below. So hopefully that made a lot of sense, and I look forward to supporting your stress through nitric oxide production. Take care.